The Forgotten Omega, a lonely beginning. In the depths of a cold, shadowed pack house, where the echo of silence drowned out any semblance of warmth, I first learned the meaning of invisibility. From the moment I took my earliest steps, I was cast into a life where I belonged to the lowest rank, a mere omega, unnoticed and uncherished by those around me. I remember the constant hum of quiet despair, the relentless ticking of the clock, marking the endless hours of scrubbing dishes, mopping floors, and cleaning up after others. Every chore was a reminder of my insignificance in a world where every wolf had a role, a family, and a place in the hierarchy. I was left to wander the periphery of pack life, a ghost amid the bustling energies of higher-ranked wolves who reveled in bonds and brotherhood, leaving me alone in a maze of duty and neglect. The pack house itself was a sprawling labyrinth of cold stone and faded grandeur. Long, echoing hallways and dimly lit corners were my constant companions, each step underscored by the weight of isolation. I slept on a cramped cot in a drafty basement, the chill of the concrete mingling with the ache of loneliness. There was no lullaby to soothe my nights, only the soft murmur of my own thoughts and the distant, unfeeling sounds of life above. Despite the bleakness, I clung to a fragile sense of purpose. The endless cycle of cleaning and organizing became my sanctuary, a quiet reminder that even if no one else saw my worth, I could find solace in the rhythm of routine. Every sweep of a broom and every careful fold of a tablecloth was a silent testament to my persistence. Yet, beneath the surface of this mundane existence, a storm of emotions raged in secret. There was a quiet rebellion within me, a yearning to be seen, to break free from the shackles of insignificance. I often found myself wondering if there was more to life than this endless servitude, if the darkness of solitude could one day give way to a spark of hope. But the harsh reality of pack life weighed heavily on me. Every glance from a higher-ranked wolf, every dismissive whisper in the corridor, hammered home the painful truth. I was nothing more than an afterthought, destined to remain forever in the shadows. In this unyielding solitude, my only true companion was my wolf, Ember, a quiet presence that shared my burdens and bore witness to my silent suffering. Ember was not the fierce, majestic creature the legends spoke of, but a humble, unassuming part of me that quietly howled at the moon. When the night fell, and the pack's raucous laughter faded into the distance, Ember and I would wander through our inner landscape, questioning if our fate was written in stone. I wondered if my destiny was to fade away, unnoticed by both the pack and the world beyond these stony walls. As I drifted through these days, the air heavy with despair, I could sense a subtle shift stirring at the edges of my existence, a whisper of change that promised to break the relentless monotony. It was a feeling both tantalizing and terrifying, hinting at the possibility that perhaps, somewhere in the labyrinth of this forsaken life, a new chapter was waiting to be written. I began to wonder if there was a force, a hidden power, that could awaken the spark dormant within me. Was I destined to remain the Each day merged into the next in a blur of silent servitude, yet deep within, the embers of an unspoken desire burned steadily. I craved recognition, not for vanity, but for the deep, aching need to be understood and valued. In the dim light of dawn, as I performed my duties with methodical precision, I could almost imagine a different life, a life where I was no longer confined to the fringes, where my heart could beat freely in the glow of acceptance. That secret hope, fragile as it was, clung to me like the last thread of warmth in a cold and indifferent world. This was the beginning of my journey, a journey not just through the corridors of the pack house, but into the depths of my own soul. In the solitude of my daily labors, I forged a quiet resilience. I began to see that the very tasks meant to diminish me could, in fact, be the crucible in which my inner strength was born. Every dish scrubbed, every floor mopped, Every whispered moment in the darkness became a stepping stone, a reminder that even in the most isolated corners of existence, the promise of transformation lingered. And so, with the quiet determination of one who has known only neglect, I braced myself for the unknown. The pack's hierarchy, the unyielding traditions, and the cold indifference of my surroundings could not erase the flicker of hope that stirred within me. I was the forgotten Omega, but in the silent echoes of my lonely existence, I vowed to carve out a destiny that would one day shatter the chains of insignificance. The question lingered, a haunting refrain in my mind. Would the day come when I, too, could rise from the shadows and claim my place in the light? This was my lonely beginning, an unremarkable start, yet a spark of possibility that the arrival of Ember, a transformative shift. In the silent, oppressive twilight of a particularly cold night, everything changed. It began with an unfamiliar tremor deep within me, a sudden searing pain that radiated from my core and surged outward like wildfire. In that instant, I knew something monumental was about to happen. I could almost feel the air itself pulsating with the promise of transformation, as if the very fabric of my being was preparing to break free from a long-forgotten cage. The pain was excruciating, a raw and visceral agony that clenched every muscle and tightened every sinew in my body. It was as though every cell screamed in protest, desperate to be released from the shackles of my human frailty. I fell to my knees, my breaths coming in ragged, uneven gasps. The world around me blurred, and the dull ache of the familiar merged with an electrifying current of energy that surged like a tidal wave through my veins. Amid the chaos of sensations, there was a single, undeniable truth. The change was inevitable. In the dim glow of a solitary lantern, I watched in both horror and awe as my form began to shift. The soft skin that had once concealed the quiet vulnerability of my body started to ripple and morph. Muscles contracted and expanded with a life of their own, and the very air seemed to thrum with the promise of a hidden strength. My arms elongated, becoming leaner and more sinewy, while my legs grew stronger and more agile, attributes that spoke of an animalistic prowess I had never known. But even as these physical changes unfolded, an undercurrent of pain and isolation persisted. The transformation was not a gentle, graceful evolution. It was a brutal, wrenching metamorphosis that demanded a heavy toll. And then, in a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, I felt it. A part of me emerging from the depths of my being, a presence that had long lain dormant. My wolf, Ember, awoke with a force that both terrified and exhilarated me. There was an intensity in Ember's rise that defied the mundane limits of my previous existence. Yet, as this wild spirit claimed its space within me, I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between what was expected and what I was becoming. Ember was not the majestic, awe-inspiring beast that one might have anticipated from a creature destined to be a symbol of power. Instead, she manifested as something modest and unremarkable, a small, unassuming form with fur that was a muted blend of brownish gray, far from the striking, commanding presence others possessed. It was as if the gods had intended for a creature of grandeur, but fate had decided otherwise, leaving me with a version of power that was fraught with internal conflict. Every nerve in my body lit up with the transformation's agony and ecstasy, a cocktail of sensation that blurred the lines between pain and liberation. I could feel the coarse texture of my new fur prickling against my skin, each strand a testament to the battle that had just been waged within me. The cool night air brushed over my freshly transformed body, carrying with it the mingled scents of pine, earth, and something deeply. But even as Ember stirred within me, there was an undeniable sense of inadequacy that clawed at the edges of my consciousness. I looked down at my new form and saw the disparity between my unremarkable appearance and the formidable, majestic forms I had only ever observed in others. While many of my packmates boasted coats of rich, vibrant hues and bodies honed by years of fierce battles, I felt as if I were wearing a disguise, a thin veneer of strength that barely concealed my inherent fragility. The physical transformation, though real and undeniable, did not erase the memories of my past insignificance. Instead, it deepened the internal struggle, forcing me to confront the harsh reality that true power was more than just muscle and fur. It was an enduring will, a burning desire to be more than what fate had assigned. As the metamorphosis slowly subsided, I was left trembling in the cold, my heart pounding in my ears with a mix of triumph and despair. The pain gradually receded into a dull, throbbing ache, leaving behind a profound silence where my old self had once resided. In that heavy, quiet moment, I realized that Ember's emergence was both a blessing and a curse, a chance for redemption that came with the burden of relentless self-doubt. In the echoing stillness of that transformative hour, the conflicting voices inside me battled fiercely. One part of me rejoiced at the newfound strength, the fresh promise of a life unburdened by the chains of invisibility. Another part wept for the modest, almost fragile form I now bore, a constant reminder that the road to true power was paved with relentless struggle. I could feel the weight of my past, the years of neglect and quiet suffering, pressing against the promise of the future. Yet in that charged atmosphere, the spark of hope burned bright. If I could learn to harness this raw, unrefined power, perhaps I could finally redefine my destiny in that moment. Standing in the lonely aftermath of my transformation, I vowed that I would not be defined by the limits of my appearance. Ember had awoken, and with her, a chance to rise above the past. I knew the journey ahead would be fraught with inner turmoil and external challenges, but I also knew that each struggle would forge a part of me into something stronger, something capable of defying the harsh judgments of the pack. As the night deepened around me, the sound of my ragged breaths mingled with the distant howl of the wind. Life in the shadows. The world of menial tasks. Every day in the pack was an unchanging symphony of monotony, a relentless cycle of cleaning, mending, and serving that seemed to strip away the colors of life, leaving behind only shades of gray. In the early hours before dawn, I would wake in the dim, cold space of my basement cot, the bare walls and sparse furnishings a constant reminder of my lowly station. The chill in the air wasn't merely physical. It seeped deep into my bones, echoing the emptiness that had long defined my existence. My mornings were spent in quiet isolation, preparing for a day of ceaseless labor. I would slip on my threadbare garments, the fabric worn from years of duty, and venture into the vast, echoing corridors of the pack house. There, under the flickering light of aging lamps, I began my daily ritual. Each task was performed with a measured precision that belied the inner turmoil I carried. I scrubbed floors until they shone, mopped them meticulously, and dusted every surface, ensuring that even the smallest speck of dirt was banished from sight. This was my world, one defined by the hum of routine and the soft clatter of my own footsteps against cold stone. In the great dining hall, where the remnants of grand feasts lay scattered after celebrations, I took on the burden of restoring order. My hands moved with a familiarity born of years of practice, carefully repairing torn tablecloths and aligning every chair and plate with painstaking care. The clink of cutlery and the murmur of distant conversations served as a constant background score, yet I remained detached, a silent observer amidst the bustle of higher ranks who enjoyed warmth and camaraderie, things I could only dream of. The days merged into one another, each indistinguishable from the last, defined by an endless list of duties that left little time for self-reflection or respite. I moved through the pack house like a shadow, quiet, unobtrusive, unnoticed by those around me. The tasks were simple yet soul-crushing. They were a never-ending testament to my insignificance in the grand tapestry of pack life. while others engaged in spirited conversation, laughing over shared memories and future hopes. I was left to my own devices, my only companions the echoes of my own thoughts, and the constant rhythm of repetitive labor. There were moments, however, when the stillness of my work was interrupted by brief exchanges with fellow Omegas. These fleeting conversations, laced with small talk about chores and daily routines, were a bittersweet reminder that I was not entirely alone. Yet, even in these rare interactions, there was an unspoken truth. The bonds they shared were filled with familial love, a warmth and security that I could never fully grasp. I listened silently, absorbing every word with a mixture of longing and resignation, knowing that my life was destined to remain on the outskirts of such cherished connections as I moved from one task to the next, cleaning, repairing, serving. There was a steady undercurrent of resilience that sustained me. Despite the relentless grind, a quiet strength blossomed within me, nurtured by the simple act of fulfilling my responsibilities day after day. In each sweep of the broom and every carefully mended rip, I found a small measure of dignity. It was as if these menial tasks, though seemingly insignificant to others, were the very means by which I affirmed my existence. I clung to the notion that perhaps, in this repetitive labor, there was a hidden purpose, a way to prove to myself that I was. Yet, even in the midst of such unwavering routine, there was a persistent, almost imperceptible stirring, a sensation that whispered of change and promise. It was during the quiet moments, when the dust had settled and the echoes of my work lingered in the air, that I felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere. The monotony that had defined my everyday began to carry a hint of something greater, something that beckoned from beyond the confines of my current reality. There were whispers in the wind, fleeting images of a future where I might rise above the drudgery and claim a place of significance among my kin. As I polished the grand hall's once stately surfaces, I would catch my reflection in the gleaming floors. In that brief moment, I saw not just the tired eyes and worn hands of a lowly servant, but a spark of determination, a small, resilient flame that refused to be extinguished by the shadows of insignificance. It was a silent promise to myself that, despite the overwhelming weight of routine and isolation, I would not remain defined solely by my lowly status. Deep within me, I sensed that change was on the horizon, a transformation that could shatter the confines of my existence and propel me toward a destiny far beyond the narrow corridors of the pack house. In those quiet, introspective moments, as I arranged the final touches on a nearly forgotten banquet table, a whisper of hope mingled with the soft clatter of plates and silverware. The task was not just a duty, it was a small act of defiance against a life of obscurity. And as the morning light began to creep into the darkened corners of the pack house, casting long, stretching shadows across the floor, I realized that perhaps the long, unyielding days of servitude were merely the calm before an inevitable storm, storm that promised to sweep me away from the shadows and into the blazing light of a new destiny. In this world of menial tasks and ceaseless labor, where every day was a quiet testament to resilience, the faint murmur of change was enough to stir the embers of my spirit. I clung to that hope, feeling it pulse like a heartbeat within me. A constant, unyielding reminder that even in the deepest rumors of an alpha, the legend of Lucian, whispers began to stir among the pack long before his footsteps echoed through our halls. In hushed voices, older wolves, and even the youngest fighters would speak of Alpha Lucian as though he were a myth, an almost otherworldly figure whose very name was draped in both awe and trepidation. His reputation had spread like wildfire, carried on the winds of distant territories and the murmurs of those who had witnessed his power firsthand. Some said he was born of lightning and storm, forged in the fires of relentless battles that only the bravest could endure. For years, his absence had been a shroud over our pack, a silence so heavy that every heartbeat seemed to echo in the void he left behind. I often found myself daydreaming about him during the endless hours of labor, imagining what it would be like if he were here. The stories told of his unparalleled strength, his ability to command not only the respect of warriors, but also the unwavering loyalty of every member of the pack. They said his eyes burned with a cobalt intensity, capable of freezing the blood in your veins, and that his presence alone could silence a room filled with dissent. He was, in many ways, the embodiment of what an alpha should be: fierce, unyielding, and imbued with an almost mystical authority. Every rumor painted him as a living legend, a warrior who had ventured far beyond our familiar territories to secure alliances and vanquish enemies. His departure was not out of neglect or disinterest. Rather, it was a calculated journey to expand our reach, to forge bonds that would ensure our survival and dominance in a world where power was the only currency. Some even whispered that his years away had only honed his skills, transforming him into a force so formidable that no rival dared to approach his realm. The pack spoke of him with reverence, as though each syllable of his name carried the weight of destiny itself. As his return drew near, the anticipation within the pack became palpable, a charged electricity that seemed to vibrate through the very air. In every corner of our dilapidated pack house, eyes were cast upward, and ears perked in expectation. Conversations hushed when his name was mentioned, and even the usually boisterous warriors fell into a respectful silence. I remember the nights spent under the pale glow of the moon, when the wind carried echoes of his exploits from far-off lands. There was both excitement and dread intermingling in those moments, a bittersweet cocktail of hope and fear. For while his return promised a surge of power, it also threatened to disrupt the fragile balance of our existence. The legend of Lucian was etched into every whispered tale. They said he had once led our ancestors into battles that became the stuff of lore, turning the tide of war with a single, decisive act of bravery. His leadership was not just a matter of physical prowess, but a testament to an unyielding spirit and an indomitable will. Even now, in my quieter moments, I could almost feel the weight of those ancient stories, as if they were woven into the very fabric of my soul. The thought of him walking back into our midst, of his presence rekindling. Yet, with each passing day, as the rumors grew louder and the signs of his imminent return became harder to ignore, there was an undercurrent of dread that ran alongside the excitement. What if the alpha who returned was not the same Lucian that our hearts had come to revere? What if the trials he faced in distant lands had tempered his spirit in unforeseen ways, leaving him more ruthless, more calculating? The pack's elders exchanged wary glances, their eyes betraying a mix of hope and skepticism. In the shadowy corners of our world, doubts began to fester, whispers of change, of alliances shifting like sand under the weight of inevitable conflict. In the midst of this swirling uncertainty, I found solace in the vivid images conjured by the stories. I imagined Lucian emerging through the heavy wooden doors, his broad shoulders and powerful frame commanding the attention of every wolf present. His gaze, sharp and unyielding, would sweep across the room, silencing the murmurs of dissent and igniting a renewed sense of purpose in even the most downtrodden among us. There was something magnetic about the idea of him, a promise that no matter how desolate our existence had become, there was still a chance for rebirth, for the revival of our collective strength. The anticipation was not merely a product of idle fantasy. It was a tangible force that seemed to pulse in the air. Every rustle of leaves outside, every distant howl of the wind, carried with it a hint of his coming. In those moments, as the pack collectively held its breath, I could sense that a turning point was near, a time when the long barren days of servitude and obscurity might finally give way to an era of renewed hope and fierce determination. Thus, the legend of Lucian grew, not just as a memory of past glories, but as a beacon for the future. His return promised to shatter the chains of our mundane existence, to inspire us to rise above our assigned roles and embrace a destiny that had long been denied to us. As the shadows lengthened and the nights grew colder, I clung to the whispered promise of change, a promise that one day, the Alpha, with his legendary might and enigmatic presence, the Alpha's return, a force of nature, it was as if time itself held its breath when the day finally arrived. The entire pack, long subdued under the weight of routine and despair, seemed to awaken to a palpable electric anticipation. The silence that had cloaked the pack house broke abruptly with murmurs and rustling, an omen of something monumental about to unfold. And then, like a bolt of lightning piercing a darkened sky, he appeared. Alpha Lucian emerged from the distant horizon with an entourage that exuded raw power and undeniable authority. His entrance was nothing short of cinematic, a commanding silhouette framed by the early morning light, his broad shoulders and powerful stance immediately capturing the attention of every wolf in attendance. There was a magnetic quality about him, as if nature itself had conspired to sculpt the perfect leader. His hair, a cascade of midnight black, shimmered against the backdrop of his deep weathered tan skin, and his eyes, a piercing cobalt, seemed to burn with an inner fire that could both soothe and ignite the soul. The pack hushed in reverence as he strode forward, each step measured and purposeful, his presence alone silencing even the most boisterous of voices. His entourage, a formidable cadre of seasoned warriors, flanked him with a silent, lethal elegance, each member exuding a quiet promise of protection and might. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the intensity of his aura, a palpable force that left no doubt as to who commanded respect within these walls. Even the once indifferent corridors of the pack house seemed to transform, echoing with a renewed energy that stirred dormant hopes and fears alike. I stood at the edge of the gathering, my heart pounding in my chest like a wild drum, every muscle in my body tensed, caught between overwhelming nervous admiration and the terror of being noticed. The mere sight of Lucian ignited a storm of conflicting emotions within me. Part of me longed to step forward, to bask in the glow of his unyielding strength, while another part shrank away, fearing the inevitable repercussions of drawing attention to myself. In that moment, I felt as though my very existence balanced on a razor's edge, an Omega who dared to dream amidst a sea of untamed power. Lucian's eyes swept over the assembly with an almost otherworldly intensity. It was as if he could see, right through the facades of rank and duty, penetrating to the core of every wolf's being. In his gaze, there was not only the reflection of countless battles fought and victories won, but also a silent promise, a vow to restore order and strength to a pack that had long been mired in neglect. His lips, set in a firm, determined line, spoke volumes even in their stillness. They communicated an unspoken command that every wolf was expected to follow without question. As he advanced, the ambient tension transformed into an almost tangible force. The usual clamor of whispered conversations faded into a respectful silence. Every step he took was imbued with the weight of his legacy. Every movement a demonstration of refined power honed through years of relentless pursuit of excellence. I felt my skin prickle, every nerve ending alight with the dual thrill of admiration and apprehension. The risk of being seen, of inadvertently drawing the wrath. The scene before me was both breathtaking and terrifying. Lucian's presence reshaped the very atmosphere of the pack. His entrance was a declaration, a bold statement that the era of complacency was over and that the pack would once again rise to meet its destiny. His entourage moved with an orchestrated precision that spoke of countless hours of training and unwavering loyalty. They were not merely followers. They were living embodiments of the power and discipline that defined his reign. In that charged moment, I was caught in the crossfire of awe and vulnerability. Every whispered exclamation, every cautious glance from the higher-ranked wolves, magnified my own insignificance. Yet amid the swirling emotions, there was also a stirring of hope, a fragile, desperate hope that perhaps, under his formidable leadership, even I could find a way to transcend the shadows of my past. The risk was immense. One misstep, one unwelcome glance, could shatter the delicate equilibrium I had fought so hard to maintain. And yet, as I watched Lucian's resolute expression and felt the weight of his authority, I knew that his return was more than just a momentary spectacle. It was a harbinger of change. A force of nature had reawakened within our midst, and its impact was destined to ripple through every corner of our existence. As the Alpha continued to move forward, his eyes briefly met mine, a fleeting exchange laden with unspoken understanding. In that instant, I sensed both caution and a hint of encouragement, as though he recognized the quiet determination that burned within me. But the moment was quickly swallowed by the overwhelming tide of his presence, leaving me both invigorated and terrified of the new reality he heralded. Lucian's return was not merely an arrival, it was a catalyst, a seismic shift that promised to reshape our world. And as the murmurs of anticipation grew into a resonant, collective heartbeat, I knew that the days ahead would be marked by trials and transformation. The Alpha had returned, and with him, a fateful encounter in the hallway, in the labyrinthine corridors of the pack house, where dim light and long shadows merged into an ever-changing tapestry. An unexpected moment shattered the monotonous cadence of my day. I had been busy polishing the aged frames of portraits depicting long-forgotten alphas, my mind absorbed in the mundane routine of upkeep, when I suddenly sensed a shift in the atmosphere, a silent disturbance that sent a shiver racing down my spine. It began with a subtle tightening at the back of my neck, as though a silent observer had taken position behind me. I paused, hands trembling slightly on the cool glass of the picture frame, and the world around me seemed to narrow into a tunnel of heightened senses. The quiet murmur of my footsteps on the worn wooden floor was joined by an unexpected surge of adrenaline, making my heart hammer in my chest. In that fleeting second, every sound was amplified: the soft creak of the floorboards, the distant whisper of the wind outside, and even the muted hum of my own breath. I turned slowly, compelled by an instinct I could neither comprehend nor resist. There, emerging from the subtle interplay of light and shadow, was Alpha Lucian. His presence was overwhelming, a force that commanded the space with effortless authority. For a moment, the hallway, with its stale air and faded murals, transformed into a stage for an encounter that felt both predestined and perilous. Our eyes met across the narrow passage, and in that instant, time seemed to suspend itself. His gaze was piercing, a storm of cobalt intensity that seemed to strip away the layers of insignificance I had worn for so long. It was as if he could see every hidden part of me: the quiet resilience, the searing pain of abandonment, and the faint spark of hope that flickered in the depths of my soul. His eyes, burning with a mix of raw power and unspoken desire, locked onto mine, and the effect was instantaneous and disarming. A rush of conflicting emotions surged within me, an acute fear of exposure, of being seen in my most vulnerable state, intertwined with an inexplicable, magnetic pull that ignited a spark of desire. I felt as though I was teetering on the edge of two worlds: the familiar domain of my lowly existence, and the tantalizing promise of something far greater. The air around us grew thick with tension, charged by the collision of our unspoken energies. I could almost taste the electric charge that seemed to vibrate between us, a silent dialogue of yearning and caution that resonated with the unyielding beat of my heart. The sensory overload was nearly overwhelming. I caught a faint but unmistakable scent of pine and smoke mingling with the crisp, cool air, a heady aroma that spoke of ancient forests and untamed wilderness, a stark contrast to the sterile, confined space of the pack house. The sound of my own heartbeat thundered in my ears, each pulse echoing the rapid tempo of my rising emotions. I could feel the texture of my skin under my fingertips, every nerve ending alight with an acute awareness of his presence. It was as though the very essence of my being was being recalibrated by this encounter. Each sensation of For a long, suspended moment, we stood in that narrow corridor, the Alpha and the forgotten Omega, each defined by our own struggles, yet inexplicably drawn together by a force that defied the rigid boundaries of our worlds. His features, usually so stern and imposing, softened ever so slightly as if he too was caught in the gravity of the moment. There was a flicker of something vulnerable in his eyes, a fleeting glimpse of inner turmoil that spoke of battles fought, both on the field and within his own heart. I wanted to speak, to ask him if he felt the same surge of inexplicable connection. But the words died on my tongue, lost in the intensity of our shared silence. Every instinct urged me to retreat, to hide once more in the comforting anonymity of my role. Yet the magnetic pull of his gaze held me captive. In that charged space between us, the rules of rank and duty faded into insignificance, leaving only the raw, unfiltered truth of our encounter. Then, as swiftly as it began, the moment fractured. A sudden shift in the ambient light, a flicker of movement at the edge of my vision, drew my attention away, and I felt a cold gust of wind brush past us, as if nature itself intervened. The spell was broken, leaving behind a profound, lingering silence that resonated with the promise of change. My heart, still pounding in its relentless rhythm, seemed to whisper that nothing would ever be the same again. As the corridor resumed its quiet hum, I was left standing there, caught between the worlds of fear and hope, certainty and doubt. The encounter had left me irrevocably altered, a bond silently forged in that fleeting exchange of glances, a bond that threatened to upend everything I had ever known. I knew, deep within, that my destiny was now entwined with Lucian's, in ways I could neither predict nor fully understand. And so, as the cool air wrapped around me, and the soft footsteps of retreating pack members filled the space, I realized that I stood on the precipice of a new, uncertain path, a path that promised both immense risk and the tantalizing possibility of transformation. In that narrow, dimly lit hallway, I was forced to confront the life-changing bond that had been ignited between us. A bond. The unspoken bond. Confusion and revelation. After that fateful moment in the hallway, the weight of what had transpired pressed upon me like an unseen shroud. In the solitude of my small room, I replayed every detail in my mind. A silent film of stolen glances, raw intensity, and an overwhelming connection that I couldn't fully comprehend. Each recollection was both a balm and a torment, soothing my longing for recognition while fanning the flames of inner turmoil. I was torn between a deep-seated dread of what this bond might mean and a fragile hope that it could be the key to transforming my life. Every heartbeat echoed with conflicting emotions. On one hand, I felt an inexplicable warmth, a spark of hope that perhaps, for once, I was seen for who I truly was beneath the layers of insignificance. On the other, a paralyzing fear rooted itself deep within me. What if this bond was nothing more than an illusion, a curse that would forever mark me as different in the eyes of the pack? The memory of Lucian's intense gaze haunted my thoughts, his eyes a turbulent blend of command and vulnerability that spoke of unspoken promises and hidden battles. In the quiet hours after our encounter, I found myself wandering through the dim corridors of the pack house, each step echoing the turmoil inside me. The familiar sights now seemed tainted by a new, unsettling significance. Every shadow held a whisper, every creak of the ancient floorboards a reminder that I was no longer merely a forgotten Omega. I had become tethered to something powerful, a connection that defied the rigid hierarchies and long-held beliefs of our pack. But with that connection came a storm of gossip and suspicion. The next day, as I went about my usual duties, I could feel the stares of my packmates piercing through me like shards of ice. Whispers swirled in every corner, rumors that I had somehow enticed Lucian, that our fateful meeting was more than mere chance. Some of the elder wolves exchanged disapproving glances, their eyes filled with a mix of pity and disdain. Others, perhaps emboldened by envy or fear, murmured that I was marked, cursed by the very bond that was meant to be a divine blessing. The once quiet corners of the pack house now buzzed with conjecture and half-heard conversations. Each rumor felt like a dagger to my heart. I had long been accustomed to a life of isolation and duty, where my existence went unnoticed, yet now this new attention was both unwanted and overwhelming. The burden of being linked to Lucian, the alpha who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, was a weight I hadn't asked for. I was adrift in a sea of uncertainty, struggling to reconcile my internal longing for validation with the harsh reality of a pack that thrived on rigid order and traditional roles. My nights turned into a blur of restless sleep and vivid dreams. Dreams where Lucian's eyes bore into mine, where the unspoken bond between us surged like a tidal wave, drowning me in both ecstasy and despair. In these dreams, the whispers of the pack transformed into a cacophony of voices, each one questioning my worth, my purpose, and my ability to rise above the stigma of my lowly birth. I awoke each morning with the taste of bitterness on my tongue. I tried to seek solace in the familiar tasks that had once defined my existence. The rhythmic swish of a mop, the steady scratch of a broom on hard floors, each motion was a temporary reprieve from the constant barrage of internal conflict. Yet, even in these moments of mundane labor, the memory of that hallway encounter loomed large. The scent of pine and smoke, the echo of Lucian's measured steps, and the intensity of his gaze were imprinted on my soul. I could no longer simply be the background figure, the silent worker whose life was measured only in tasks completed and surfaces polished. I had become a symbol, whether I wished it or not, a living testament to a bond that defied the natural order. The fallout among the pack was immediate and palpable. In the gathering spaces where the wolves once exchanged idle banter, a new atmosphere of tension prevailed. Some spoke with a hint of admiration, secretly wishing to catch a glimpse of the enigmatic alpha who had stirred the winds of change. Others, however, viewed my connection to Lucian as a harbinger of chaos, a dangerous deviation from tradition that could unravel the carefully maintained balance of our pack. Their voices, laced with skepticism and fear, questioned my role and my very existence. I found myself increasingly isolated, a subject of both sympathy and scorn. The whispers grew louder with each passing day, each one a reminder that the bond I now shared with Lucian was not universally celebrated, but rather a source of deep-seated discomfort and division. The very idea that the Alpha might have chosen me, the forgotten Omega, was an affront to the established order, a challenge to the hierarchy that had governed us for generations. Yet, amid this storm of internal and external strife, a singular truth began to crystallize in the depths of my mind. This bond, however tumultuous and shrouded in mystery, was irrevocable. It was a silent force that had entwined our fates, a promise that demanded both courage and sacrifice. As I stood alone in the dim light of my small room, I could feel the stirrings of a transformation that extended far beyond the confines of my current existence. I knew that I was on the brink of a journey that would force me to confront my deepest fears and unearth strengths I had never known. In that solitary, heavy moment of revelation, I realized that my path was no longer mine, alone to choose. The bond with Lucian was both a blessing and a curse, a fateful connection that carried with it the power to elevate or condemn me in the eyes of all who knew our story. And as the whispers of the pack grew into a resounding chorus of judgment and expectation, I could only wonder. Would this unspoken bond lead to my ultimate redemption, or condemn me to a lifetime of isolation and scorn? With a heart pounding with both dread and a flicker of hope, I braced myself for the next chapter of this tumultuous journey, knowing that the denial and distance, the Alpha's mixed signals. In the days that followed that fateful encounter, the corridors of the pack house seemed colder, the shadows deeper, and every heartbeat echoed with unanswered questions. Alpha Lucian, the very embodiment of raw power and enigmatic allure, had retreated into himself. Gone were the moments of raw, piercing intensity. Instead, he now moved like a ghost through meetings, training sessions, and hushed conversations. A presence both overwhelming and painfully distant. I watched him from afar, hidden in the folds of routine and silent labor, as he immersed himself in the endless tide of responsibilities. Every morning, as he strode into the training grounds, his eyes were set with steely determination, his every gesture precise and measured. Yet, in the depths of his gaze, I could no longer discern the spark of vulnerability that had so briefly illuminated our fateful hallway encounter. His focus seemed singular, consumed by the imperatives of alliance negotiations and the demands of reshaping our pack into a formidable force. Within the confines of the strategy room, his voice resonated with the authority of a born leader as he discussed tactical details with his warriors. His words, crisp and commanding, left no room for personal matters. Even when his eyes momentarily glanced in my direction, there was a fleeting hesitation, an almost imperceptible flicker of uncertainty that vanished as quickly as it appeared. It was as though he deliberately shrouded his inner world, locking away the emotions that had once bridged the gap between us. I was left yearning for the clarity of that moment, when our souls had silently communicated their shared secrets, a clarity now obscured by the Alpha's deliberate distance. Every interaction, however brief, became a trial of my own resolve. I would catch him at the edge of a meeting, his face momentarily softened by fatigue, and I would reach out with a silent hope that he might acknowledge the bond we had sparked. But his reply was always a nod or a passing glance, detached and professional, as if the connection we once shared was nothing more than a fleeting aberration, a mistake to be forgotten. In those moments, the sting of rejection and the pang of isolation would surge within me, leaving my heart aching for a word of reassurance, for a sign that he too felt the weight of this inexplicable tie. Late at night, when the pack house grew silent and even the whispers of discontent faded into the background, I lay awake on my cot, my mind a battleground of emotions. I replayed our encounter over and over, trying desperately to decode his mixed signals. Was his distance an act of self-preservation, a means to shield himself from the vulnerability that our bond demanded? Or was it a calculated retreat, a decision, made under the crushing weight of leadership responsibilities? The answers eluded me, leaving behind a churning sea of doubts and fears. The hours stretched on, and with every passing day, the internal conflict deepened. I questioned whether I had imagined the intensity of our connection, whether the spark I had felt was merely a trick of the light in that narrow corridor. Yet, every time I caught a glimpse of him, his rugged features set in a mask of stoic resolve, his broad shoulders moving with a practiced, distant grace, the memories returned with a jolt. His retreat into meetings and training sessions, his constant immersion in the affairs of the pack, were clear indicators that something had shifted. I could no longer tell if he was protecting himself from the vulnerability. My thoughts swirled in a tempest of internal monologue. What does he truly feel? I wondered. Is he afraid of the bond we share, or does he simply not know how to embrace it? Each unanswered question hammered at my soul, the silence of his mixed signals ringing louder than any spoken word. I recalled the brief moment when his eyes met mine, an instant so charged with emotion that it felt as if time itself had paused. And I couldn't help but wonder if that was the Alpha I once knew, or a stranger now obscured by duty and distance. I tried to keep myself occupied, throwing myself into the familiar tasks of my daily routine. Yet every chore became a reminder of the emotional chasm that had opened between us. The act of scrubbing floors, dusting off memories of a past where I had felt unseen, now carried a bitter irony. For in that endless cycle of menial tasks, the distance between us was both physically tangible and painfully metaphorical. A barrier built not of stone or tradition, but of unspoken fears and half-formed regrets. As the days blurred together, I noticed the whispers among the pack beginning to stir anew. The murmurs of my connection to Lucian, once a quiet secret shared only in stolen glances, now grew louder, tinged with disapproval and uncertainty. The pack, ever so cautious of any deviation from tradition, seemed to sense the vulnerability in his retreat, and I became the unwitting focal point of their doubts and speculations. The very bond that had once ignited hope now cast a long, lingering shadow, a specter of what might be if our fate remained unresolved. Standing in the dim light of an early evening, I found myself at a crossroads, my heart heavy with unanswered questions. Lucian's mixed signals, his deliberate distancing, left me grasping for clarity in a maze of duty, desire, and despair. With every passing moment, the truth of our connection, its potential for both salvation and ruin, became increasingly murky. I couldn't shake the relentless, echoing question: what does the future hold for us? In that fragile space between hope and despair, I resolved to seek the answers, even as the ambiguity of his behavior threatened to pull us further apart. And so, with a heart full of yearning and a mind racing with uncertainties, I braced myself for the next chapter of this tumultuous journey, unsure if the bond. A desperate plea. Confronting the uncertainty. One sleepless night, as the cool darkness settled over the pack house, I found myself standing before a heavy oak door that led to Lucian's private office, a room that had once been a symbol of his unwavering authority, but now promised to reveal the depths of his inner conflict. My heart pounded like a war drum as I gathered every ounce of courage to knock, my hand trembling so visibly that I feared it might give away the storm of emotions roiling within me. The silence that followed my knock was oppressive, each second stretching out like an eternity. Finally, the door swung open, revealing Lucian in the soft glow of a single lamp. His face, usually so composed and impenetrable, now bore the marks of recent strain. Shadowed eyes that flickered with conflict, and a set jaw that hinted at unspoken pain. For a moment, the space between us was charged with a raw, desperate energy that I could neither ignore nor fully understand. "Lucian," I began, my voice barely a whisper over the steady hum of the night. I can't keep living in this uncertainty." My words trembled in the air, heavy with the weight of all the unspoken longing, fear, and defiance that had built up over these agonizing days. I stepped into the office, my gaze fixed on his for answers, even as the pack's pressure and the ghosts of whispered rumors haunted me. He looked at me, his eyes dark pools of conflicting emotions, hardness mixed with a fleeting vulnerability that spoke of battles fought within his own soul. "Arya," he said, his tone low and measured, as if trying to maintain a facade of control. But the crack in his voice betrayed his inner turmoil, a secret vulnerability that he had long buried beneath the mantle of leadership. I took a deep breath and continued. "Every time you pull away, it feels like you're tearing a part of me, away as well. I need to know. Am I just a mistake? A token meant to appease the pack's doubts? Or is there something more, something real in the bond we share?" My words spilled out in a rush, a desperate plea to bridge the distance that had grown between us. Lucian's eyes darkened further as he leaned back against his desk, his gaze never leaving mine. "You have no idea how hard it is to balance everything," he murmured. "The weight of the pack's expectations, the constant scrutiny. It leaves me with no room for weakness." His voice wavered at the edges, betraying a depth of emotion that he had struggled to contain. "But you, Arya, you have made me question everything. My duty, my heart. I'm torn between the need to be strong for them and the overwhelming desire to be free, to be with you." The air in the room seemed to crackle with tension, each of his words slicing through the silence with both promise and pain. I could feel the vulnerability in his admission, the raw honesty of a man torn between his responsibilities and his desires. "Lucian, I'm not asking for certainty," I replied, my voice catching with emotion. "I'm asking for you to let me in, to let me share the burden of this uncertainty. I'm tired." For a moment, the only sound was the soft rustle of the curtains and the distant murmur of the pack outside. Lucian's eyes searched mine, and I felt as if they were trying to read the very essence of my soul. "I do care," he whispered, almost to himself, as if the admission was both a relief and a curse. "But every time I get too close, the fear of losing control, and of what the pack might say, holds me back." His confession echoed through me, stirring a mix of sorrow and longing. "Then tell me," I urged, stepping even closer. "Tell me what you're afraid of. I'm here, Lucian. I want to understand, even if it hurts. Don't push me away. Don't let me be the cause of your isolation." He hesitated, his brow furrowing as if weighing the impossible choice between duty and desire. In that fragile, charged silence, I could see the war waging behind his eyes. The alpha who was expected to be infallible, yet now was exposed as a man caught in the crossfire of his own heart. "I'm afraid," he finally admitted, his voice raw and earnest, "that if I let this bond fully awaken, I might lose everything I've built. The pack, the alliances, they all depend on me, and I'm not sure I can risk their trust for something as unpredictable as us." The tension in the room became almost unbearable, the silence punctuated only by our ragged breaths. I reached out, my hand trembling as it hovered near his, wanting nothing more than to bridge the gap between us. "But what if," I whispered, "what if this bond isn't a weakness at all? What if it's the very thing that can make us stronger, that can unite us instead of tearing us apart?" My words hung in the air, a desperate plea to redefine the rules we had long been forced to follow. Lucian's eyes softened for a brief, heartbreaking moment, and I thought I saw the spark of hope that had once lit up our encounter. Yet, even as he drew closer, the distance that duty demanded pulled him away. "I wish I could give you the certainty you need, Arya," he said, voice barely audible. "But right now, I'm trapped between the expectations of a pack that sees my vulnerability as a threat, and the relentless fear that I might lose you if I let my guard down." His hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity racing through me, but then he pulled back, retreating into the shadows of his responsibilities. In that heartbreaking moment, as the door to his office slowly closed, leaving me standing there with my heart shattered and 1,000 questions echoing in the silence, I was forced to confront the ultimate truth. Our bond, as profound and life-altering as it was, remained a fragile mystery. The uncertainty of his mixed signals, the Alpha's desperate internal battle, and the ever-looming pressure of the pack coalesced into one inescapable question, one that reverberated in the quiet that followed his departure. What will become of us when duty and desire collide? Rejection, protection, and the weight of expectations. In the wake of our charged confrontation, a chill descended not just over the pack house, but over my very soul. The room where I had dared to plead for clarity now echoed with an icy silence. Silence that spoke of rejection and the heavy burden of unspoken responsibilities. Lucian's once fiery gaze had dimmed into a cold, distant glare, leaving me adrift in a sea of conflicting emotions that threatened to consume me. The fallout was immediate and unforgiving. As I returned to my duties, every glance, every whisper from the pack carried the unmistakable sting of judgment. The higher-ranked wolves, once oblivious to my presence, now eyed me with a mix of pity and scorn. I became the subject of hushed rumors, a forbidden liaison, a misstep in the delicate balance of our society. The very bond I had so desperately yearned to understand was now a mark upon me, branding me as both a liability and a target for reproach. Lucian's words, once full of passionate promise, now resonated with a dissonant echo. "You're under my protection," he had said. Yet that same declaration felt like a cold command, a reminder that I was to be kept at arm's length. His protection was not born of tenderness, but from a duty steeped in fear. Fear of the pack's disapproval, fear of the alliances that depended on his unyielding strength. In his tone, I could hear the weight of expectations pressing down on him, a burden so immense that it forced him to retreat behind a wall of impassivity. Every time I tried to catch a glimpse of him, I was met with the steely mask of the alpha, a man who had built his world on power and order, now unable to reconcile his inner conflicts with the demands of leadership. His distant demeanor left me questioning. Was I merely a symbol, a token of his authority to placate the doubters? Or was there still a place in his heart for the connection we had shared? The answer remained elusive, hidden behind a veil of responsibilities and the relentless pressure of tradition. I found myself wandering the pack house alone, seeking solace in the familiar yet indifferent rhythm of my tasks. The clatter of cleaning tools and the soft hum of the pack's daily routines became a backdrop for my internal struggle. Every sweep of the broom, every careful fold of linens, was a reminder of my insignificance, a small cog in the vast, unyielding machine of our society. Yet, amid that mundane drudgery, there flickered a stubborn ember of hope, a quiet defiance that whispered, I was more than what the pack would allow me to be. In the silence of the night, when the pack's scorn was at its loudest and the weight of their expectations bore down like an avalanche, I would lie awake, my mind a battleground of raw emotions. I questioned the duality of Lucian's protection, a shield meant to keep me safe, yet simultaneously a barrier that kept me painfully isolated. His insistence that I was his mate, delivered in a voice devoid of warmth, left me reeling with uncertainty. I felt as though I stood at the crossroads of hope and despair, where every beat of my heart was a desperate plea for clarity. The corridors, once a refuge in their quiet anonymity, now echoed with every hushed remark. Is she really his? Some would murmur. Others sneered. A weak omega, a liability. Their voices, like the chill wind through the narrow hallways, carried with them the promise of rejection, a constant reminder that the bond between us was as much a curse as it was a blessing. With each passing day, I felt the cold bite of their judgment. Yet amidst the bitter fallout, there remained a stubborn residue of hope. In rare, stolen moments, I would catch Lucian's eyes, brief, fleeting glimmers that softened his hardened exterior, suggesting that behind the facade of duty, there still lingered a man capable of feeling. It was in those moments, when his gaze faltered, and his eyes betrayed a hint of the vulnerability he so desperately tried to hide, that I clung to the possibility that our bond might yet be salvaged from the crushing weight of expectation. I began to wonder if this gulf between us, as deep and isolating as it seemed, was not an insurmountable void, but rather a challenge, a call to redefine what it meant to be protected and cherished. Could there be a way for us to bridge the distance imposed by our roles, to transform this cold, transactional protection into something that nurtured both strength and intimacy, My heart ached with the intensity of these questions, the desire for an answer that seemed just out of reach. As I navigated the murky waters of rejection and responsibility, every step forward was fraught with tension. The pack's disapproval, a constant oppressive force, pressed down on me with every task I completed, every silent glance cast in my direction. I was a walking contradiction, a being both shielded by the Alpha's protection and exposed to the harsh scrutiny of tradition. The inner battle raged on, a silent war waged in the depths of my soul, where hope and despair clashed like titanic forces. Now, as I stand at the precipice of an uncertain future, the unyielding weight of expectations looms large. The conflicted messages of Lucian, both his promise of protection and the cold distance he now maintains, leave me with a single piercing question. Is there any way to reconcile the yearning for intimacy with the harsh demands of leadership? Or am I destined to remain forever caught between the bitter taste of rejection escalating hostility, shadows of bullying and tension? As the days grew longer, the simmering hostility within the pack began to boil over into overt acts of cruelty. The once muted whispers escalated into biting taunts, and the undercurrent of disdain now manifested in harsh words and even physical confrontations. Every corner of the pack house felt charged with a tension that pressed down on me like an invisible weight. It was in these moments of escalating conflict that the true test of my resolve emerged. One cold evening, as twilight faded into a somber dusk, I found myself alone on a narrow corridor near the storeroom. The silence was deceptive, a calm before the storm. Without warning, a group of young warriors, their eyes alight with derision and mischief, emerged from the shadows. At their head was Beta Marcus, his expression twisted into a sneer that sent a chill straight to my core. The air crackled with their hostile energy as they closed in, their presence a menacing reminder that my existence, now inextricably linked to Lucian, was an anomaly they were determined to punish. "Look who it is," Marcus jeered, his voice cutting through the silence like a jagged shard of ice. "The forgotten Omega, parading around as if she belongs here." His words were laced with contempt, each syllable a deliberate attempt to undermine the small spark of defiance I had been nurturing. The warriors snickered and exchanged mocking glances, their eyes reflecting the cruel delight they found in my discomfort. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat a frantic rhythm of fear and determination. I could feel the weight of their scorn pressing in on me, the sting of their insults igniting a fire deep within. A fire that both terrified and emboldened me. Every breath felt shallow, as if the very air had turned against me. Yet I forced myself to stand tall, even as my legs trembled beneath the relentless barrage of taunts. One of the younger warriors, with a malicious glint in his eyes, stepped forward and shoved me roughly against the cold stone wall. The impact sent a jolt of pain shooting through my body, and for a fleeting moment, I felt the overwhelming urge to retreat, to disappear into the shadows from whence I came. But then, in the midst of that surge of fear, something stirred, a spark of defiance that refused to be snuffed out by cruelty. I straightened my back, pushing myself away from the wall, and looked each of them in the eye. "I belong here just as much as anyone else," I declared, my voice trembling yet resolute. The words hung in the air, a bold challenge to their authority. For a heartbeat, the corridor fell into a heavy silence, as if the world itself paused to register my defiance. Beta Marcus stepped forward, his eyes narrowing into slits of fury. "You really think you can stand up to us?" he spat, advancing with an intimidating air that suggested both physical prowess and a desire to crush any sign of rebellion. His words, harsh and unyielding, were meant to break me, to remind me that I was nothing more than an Omega, a creature destined to serve and never to lead. Around us, the murmurs of the other warriors grew louder, a chorus of sneers and derisive laughter, that attempted to drown out the courage in my voice. The tension was palpable, a charged current of hostility that surged through the narrow passage, binding us in a dangerous, unspoken contest of wills. I could feel my pulse in every nerve, each beat echoing. In that charged atmosphere, I took a shaky step forward, every movement a testament to my inner struggle. I recalled the quiet moments of resilience, when I had found solace in the rhythm of my daily tasks, when the simple act of cleaning had become a declaration of my existence. Now, faced with the raw cruelty of the pack's disdain, those moments of inner strength crystallized into a defiant roar inside me. I refused to be silenced by their cruelty. "Your words don't define me," I said, voice rising steadily despite the tremor of fear. "I know who I am, and I won't let your bitterness push me back into the shadows." The defiance in my tone was a beacon amid the oppressive gloom, a signal that I was no longer willing to be the target of their scorn. For a brief moment, as my words hung in the heavy air, the warriors paused. Their mocking expressions flickered, replaced momentarily by uncertainty, as if they were forced to reckon with the possibility that I might not be as fragile as they assumed. Yet the silence was short-lived. Marcus's sneer returned, sharper and more contemptuous than before. "We'll see how long that spark lasts," he snarled, and with a collective shove, they began to close in once more. My body tensed, every fiber alert to the imminent threat. The physical proximity of my aggressors, the echo of their taunts, and the oppressive atmosphere of the corridor all converged into a single, overwhelming surge of adrenaline. I braced myself for whatever came next, determined not to crumble beneath the weight of their hostility. As their faces loomed larger, in the dim light I could sense a shift within me, a transformation that was less about physical strength and more about an unyielding inner resolve. Every bruise that had marked my past, every whispered rumor that had sought to belittle me, now coalesced into a silent promise. I would not be defeated. Not by their cruelty, not by the weight of their expectations. And then, just as suddenly, as it had all begun, the tension reached a fevered pitch. In the charged silence that followed, I found myself suspended on the edge of something momentous, a decisive moment that would either ignite a rebellion within my soul or shatter the fragile hope that had begun to blossom in the darkness of oppression. The air crackled with the promise of change, and as I locked eyes with Beta Marcus once more, I couldn't help but wonder if this confrontation was merely the spark that would set my true destiny ablaze. In that moment, with the echo of my defiant words lingering in the air and the looming threat of further violence, the Alpha's intervention. A public display of power. In the midst of the escalating chaos, when the threat of violence was nearly palpable, and the young warrior's jeers threatened to drown out any sense of order, a sudden shift in the atmosphere signaled that fate was about to intervene. I was reeling from the sting of the confrontation, when the air trembled with a deep, resonant rumble, a sound that cut through the cacophony like a clarion call. All eyes turned toward the entrance as Alpha Lucian burst into the fray, his presence igniting a wave of shock and awe that rippled across the corridor. Lucian strode forward with the power of a tempest. His massive frame, chiseled by years of relentless battles, seemed to exude an aura that bent the very air around him. Every step he took was measured, yet thunderous, as if the earth itself acknowledged his authority. His eyes, fierce and cobalt, blazed with raw determination, their light momentarily overpowering the dim glow of the hall. It was as if, in that single, electrifying moment, he was both the storm and the calm, a force of nature summoned to restore order. Without hesitation, he intercepted the onslaught aimed at me. In a swift, decisive motion that defied the ordinary, Lucian advanced into the midst of the hostile group. His hand, powerful and unyielding, shot out and clamped around the shoulder of a particularly aggressive warrior. The impact of his grip reverberated through the room, silencing the mocking laughter as if his mere touch could shatter their bravado. In a blur of motion, his fist collided with the attacker's jaw, a collision so visceral that it seemed to suspend time. The sound of the blow, a sickening thud followed by a sharp gasp, marked the moment when the tide of violence abruptly turned. The corridor transformed into a battleground of raw power and fierce loyalty. Lucian's intervention was not a mere display of brute force. It was a symphony of precise, calculated strikes that left no doubt about his unmatched strength. Every muscle in his body tensed and released in perfect harmony, his movements fluid and relentless as he repelled further advances. The air vibrated with the echoes of his commands, each word underscored by an authority that brooked no opposition. I watched, heart hammering, as the attackers faltered, their expressions shifting from confident malice to palpable terror. One by one, they retreated under the overwhelming force of his intervention. Even those who had sneered moments before now clutched their wounds or stumbled back, their eyes wide with disbelief. The display was nothing short of cinematic, a raw, unfiltered manifestation of the Alpha's protective instinct and unyielding power. Amid the chaos, I could feel the subtle shift in the pack's collective mood. The murmurs of derision faded, replaced by a heavy, respectful silence that hung in the air like a tangible presence. Lucian's eyes met mine briefly, a fleeting exchange that was as much a reassurance as it was an indictment of the cruelty that had plagued our existence. In that look, I saw both the unwavering determination to shield me from harm and a trace of something else. After what felt like an eternity, the attackers were finally subdued, leaving the corridor strewn with echoes of their defeat. Lucian stood amid the aftermath, his chest heaving with exertion, yet his demeanor unyielding. The raw power he had, unleashed, was now tempered by a lingering calm, a stark contrast to the volatile energy that had erupted moments before. His gaze, still fierce but softened by an undeniable hint of concern, slowly shifted to survey the damage, as if assessing not only the physical wreckage, but the emotional toll of the confrontation. I remained rooted to the spot, a mixture of relief and confusion surging through me. The intervention had saved me. This was undeniable. Yet, as I stared into the depths of Lucian's eyes, I could not shake the unsettling uncertainty about our connection. His actions had been undeniably protective, a powerful declaration of his role as leader and guardian. But in that same display of raw, unfiltered power, there was a disquieting distance, an emotional barrier that left me questioning the true nature of the bond we shared. As the corridor slowly emptied and the pack members retreated to their designated corners, the Alpha's presence lingered like a heavy shadow. The warriors who had once jeered now spoke in hushed tones, their voices filled with a blend of awe and trepidation. The spectacle of his intervention had not only reasserted his dominance, but had also thrown into sharp relief the precarious position I occupied as his mate, an existence defined by both protection and isolation. I could feel my heart still racing, every throb a reminder of the dramatic clash of power and emotion. The intensity of his intervention, the resounding echo of his commands, and the violent retreat of my would-be tormentors left me with a swirl of emotions that I could barely contain. Relief mingled with confusion, hope intermingled with despair, each feeling a stark counterpoint to the other, leaving me adrift in a sea of unanswered questions. In the aftermath of that harrowing display, as I gathered the scattered remnants of my shattered resolve, one thought remained stubbornly at the forefront of my mind. What does it mean to be chosen by an Alpha who is both my protector and my enigma? The line between his duty and our bond had never been clearer, or more ambiguous. And as I stood there, amid the dissipating tension and the fading echoes of battle, I could only wonder if the price of his protection. Healing and reflection. Moments of tender vulnerability. Later that night, in the hushed solitude of the infirmary, the chaotic echoes of the corridor were replaced by a gentle quiet, a sanctuary away from the tumult of the pack house. The room was bathed in soft, warm light, its comforting glow a stark contrast to the earlier violence. I lay on a small cot, my body aching from the brutal encounter, each bruise a testament to the ordeal I had barely survived. As the night deepened, the subtle sound of soft footsteps heralded the arrival of Lucian. He entered with a quiet urgency, his presence both commanding and unexpectedly tender. For a moment, the air seemed to still as he approached, his gaze focused on my injuries with a care that belied his usual stoic demeanor. His rough, calloused hand reached out and gently brushed a stray lock of hair from my forehead. The touch, delicate yet deliberate, sent a shiver through me, one that mingled pain with a tender reassurance. "Arya," he murmured, his voice low and softened by concern. There was a vulnerability in his tone that I had not seen before, a crack in the armor of an alpha whose life was usually dictated by duty and unyielding strength. He knelt beside my cot, his broad frame looming protectively over me as he carefully inspected a bruise that marred my arm. Each touch was measured, almost reverent, as if he were handling something precious and fragile. As he dabbed at the injury, with a cool compress, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to be carried away by the sensation, a blend of relief, warmth, and an ache that ran deeper than the physical pain. In the quiet moments of that intimate space, my mind drifted, replaying the tumultuous events of the day. I recalled the fierce confrontation, the sharp echoes of hostility, and the overwhelming surge of emotions that had led me to this point. Now, however, there was only the soft murmur of Lucian's care and the rhythmic beating of my own heart. Inside, a flood of thoughts cascaded through me. How did I come to be so entangled in this web of power and longing? I wondered silently, my thoughts a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. His touch, though gentle, carried with it an undeniable message, a promise of protection that was as potent as it was elusive. I could feel the delicate interplay between his duty as an alpha and the hidden depths of his feelings, a balance he struggled to maintain. In that moment, I longed to reach out, to let him know that I needed more than just physical care. I needed understanding, a glimpse into the man behind the alpha's mask. Lucian seemed to sense the tumult within me. For a brief, suspended moment, he paused, his eyes meeting mine with a complexity that left me breathless. There was sorrow in his gaze, mingled with an unspoken desire, a silent admission of the internal battles he fought daily. "I'm sorry," he whispered, almost inaudibly, as if the word itself carried the weight of all the burdens he bore. "I wish I could ease all of this pain, not just yours but mine as well." His words resonated with a raw honesty, stirring something deep within me, a spark of hope that perhaps, together, we could heal the wounds inflicted by both our fates. As the minutes passed, the initial intensity of the day's violence receded into a reflective calm. The physical pain slowly dulled under the alpha's careful ministrations, replaced by a warmth that spread through me like a slow sunrise. I felt the gentle reassurance of his hands, his every touch a silent promise that I was not alone in this harsh world. The infirmary, with its simple, unadorned walls and soft, ambient light, became a cocoon of shared vulnerability, an oasis where the relentless expectations of the pack could momentarily be forgotten. My thoughts wandered further, delving into the uncertainty that had plagued me since our fateful encounter. Could this moment of tenderness be the beginning of something transformative? I asked myself, grappling with the conflicting emotions that had become my constant companions. I had long felt the sting of rejection and the icy distance that had grown between us. Yet now, here in the stillness of the night, a delicate possibility emerged. The possibility that beneath the hardened exterior of an alpha, there lay a man, capable of tenderness, of empathy, a man who might, Outside the infirmary, the muffled sounds of the pack's routine continued, oblivious to the intimate scene unfolding within these four walls. Yet, even as I listened to the distant echoes, I felt a deepening connection to Lucian, an unspoken bond that transcended the physical, reaching into the very core of our beings. It was a bond forged in the crucible of pain, struggle, and the quiet courage to seek solace in one another's arms. In that fragile, reflective moment, as Lucian's ministrations slowly eased the physical torment, I found myself at the cusp of a profound realization. The care he bestowed upon me was more than a duty. It was an invitation, a silent plea for understanding, and perhaps a future where the barriers between us could be dismantled. I could sense that our journey was far from over, that the path ahead would be laden with challenges, both external and internal. And yet, as I lay there, cradled in the gentle embrace of the night and the Alpha's concern, I clung to the hope that this was the beginning of something transformative. But as the soft hum of the night enveloped us, one question lingered in the still air, a question that neither of us dared to voice. Could our fragile bond, born in the crucible of pain and nurtured by these tender moments, ever truly over the night of uncertainty, sleepless torment, and inner resolve? The darkness that night was palpable, a heavy, oppressive shroud that seemed to smother every corner of my existence. In the quiet hours when even the restless wind had fallen, silent I lay awake, trapped in a prison of my own thoughts. The weight of loneliness pressed down on me, its burden as tangible as the cool sheets beneath me. Shadows danced on the walls of my small room, flickering shapes that mirrored the shifting doubts in my mind. I had long grown accustomed to the isolation of my existence, but now the solitude felt more acute, more suffocating than ever before. Every minute of the night was a battle, a relentless internal struggle that left me teetering on the edge of despair. My mind replayed the events of the day like a fractured film, each scene filled with raw emotion and unspoken words. I could not escape the memory of Lucian's conflicted gaze, nor the lingering echo of his distant protective touch. They haunted me relentlessly, twisting in my chest like a bitter reminder of both my worth and my perceived insignificance. The taste of rejection, though never overtly spoken, lingered in the back of my throat, an acrid flavor that I could not wash away. As the hours wore on, the silence became a relentless drumbeat in my ears, amplifying every fear and every hidden insecurity. I wrestled with the thought of being nothing more than a pawn, a fragile omega forever tethered to an alpha whose love was as elusive as a whisper in the wind. What if this bond, this unspoken connection we shared, was doomed to be a source of torment rather than solace? The possibility of permanent rejection, of being cast aside by both the pack and the man I yearned for, clawed at my soul with every beat of my heart. Outside, the world was cloaked in the deep blue of night, its vast expanse a mirror to my inner desolation. The moon, a distant and indifferent observer, cast pale, ghostly light through the window, transforming familiar objects into eerie silhouettes. I could hear the low murmur of the pack going about their duties in hushed tones, a constant reminder that I was isolated in my own suffering. Every creak of the old floorboards and every rustle of the wind became a sinister chorus that underscored the relentless solitude of my nights. In these quiet hours, the darkness was not merely a physical absence of light. It was a living, breathing entity that seeped into my bones and whispered all my fears back to me. I found myself questioning every aspect of my existence. Was I destined to be forever unseen, a ghost in the periphery of the pack? Did Lucian's retreat signify a deep, unbridgeable rift between us? Or was it merely the burden of leadership that forced him to shield his inner self from the vulnerability of intimacy? These questions circled my mind like vultures, each one stripping away a little more of my fragile hope. Yet, even in the midst of this torment, a small, persistent ember of defiance began to flicker within me. It was as if the very act of enduring such sleepless nights, of confronting the oppressive, void of rejection and fear, was forging a hidden strength inside. I clung to that ember, feeling it warm my heart and whisper of possibilities yet unrealized. The torment was painful, yes, but it also served as a crucible, refining my As the night dragged on, I drifted between fits of restless agitation and moments of eerie, contemplative stillness. In one such quiet moment, when the room was so silent that even my ragged breathing seemed to echo into infinity, I closed my eyes and let my thoughts wander freely. I envisioned a future where the weight of these expectations and the sting of isolation could be transformed into a source of personal power. A future where every scar, every whispered rumor, was a badge of honor that testified to my resilience. I imagined myself standing tall, not just in the eyes of the pack, but within the depths of my own heart. A beacon of defiance and determination in a world that had long tried to push me into the shadows. In that stillness, the darkness around me seemed to recede slightly, replaced by the soft glow of inner resolve. A quiet vow took shape within me, a promise that no matter how many nights I spent wrestling with fear and uncertainty, I would not let my spirit be crushed. I would prove my worth, not just for the sake of those around me, but for myself. I would rise above the whispers and the cold distance, forging a new path defined by my own strength and determination. Even if the bond with Lucian remained shrouded in ambiguity, I would not allow the weight of rejection to define my destiny. As dawn's first light began to creep through the narrow window, painting the room with a tentative, hopeful glow, I whispered my vow to the silent darkness. I will not fade away in the shadows. I will rise, and I will prove that I am more than what the pack and fate have dictated. The words were soft, almost inaudible, but in them lay a promise that resonated deep within me. The mystery of what lay ahead remained, a daunting yet irresistible challenge that beckoned me forward. A new day, a heavy burden. The protagonist's awakening. Morning crept in with a hesitant glow that barely pushed back the lingering shadows of night. I awoke to the persistent ache of bruises and a weight in my heart that felt heavier than the dark hours I had endured. Each movement brought a jolt of pain, a stark reminder of the previous day's violent confrontation. And yet, as I lay there on my narrow cot in the humble confines of my room, a peculiar clarity began to take shape. The room was sparse, its modest furnishings a world away from the opulent quarters that Lucian inhabited. While his private chambers boasted plush fabrics, ornate furniture, and a sense of refined authority, mine remained bare and functional, a silent testimony to my unremarkable station within the pack. The contrast was jarring, a constant reminder that while the alpha lived in a realm of luxury and power, I was left to contend with the physical and emotional scars of being an omega, barely noticed and forever in the shadows. I gingerly sat up, wincing as a fresh wave of pain radiated through my bruised ribs. The memory of the previous night's tormented silence mingled with the soft light of dawn, creating a surreal tableau of vulnerability and resolve. As I swung my legs over the edge of the cot, I could feel the cool, worn floor beneath my feet, a grounding reminder of the simplicity of my world. Yet even in that modest setting, I sensed a stirring of possibility, an awakening that defied the constraints of my past invisibility. The soft knock on my door was a welcome interruption. Ingrid, the seasoned gamma with silvering hair and eyes that missed nothing, stepped in with a quiet urgency. In her arms, she carried a tray with a bowl of steaming broth and a slice of hearty bread. "Good morning, Arya," she said, her tone gentle yet firm, a blend of maternal concern and pragmatic support. Her presence always lent a small measure of warmth and strength to my otherwise isolated mornings. Before I could thank her properly, Lena appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of worry and quiet encouragement. Dressed in a worn but tidy set of clothes, Lena's eyes shone with a compassion that made me feel seen, even if only for a moment. "You should eat, Arya," she urged softly, stepping closer as if to shield me from the cold remnants of my own doubts. In that instant, the weight of my burdens seemed to lessen slightly, bolstered by the care of those who dared to reach out. I accepted the broth with trembling hands, its warmth slowly seeping into my chilled bones, carrying away some of the heaviness that had settled in my heart. As I sipped, I listened to Ingrid's quiet advice about taking things one day at a time, about the need to listen to one's body and mind. Lena, ever the empathetic soul, simply sat by my side, her silence speaking volumes of solidarity and unspoken understanding. The juxtaposition of my humble existence against the backdrop of Lucian's intimidating world haunted me as I looked out the small, cracked window. Beyond, the day promised to be as relentless as ever, each moment a challenge to prove my worth, to step out from the long shadows of obscurity. I recalled the stark opulence of Lucian's quarters, the weight of his responsibilities, and the power he wielded so effortlessly. It was a world that both fascinated and frightened me, a realm where I had long been an invisible. Yet, as the soft morning light began to fill the room, and the taste of the broth warmed my spirit, a flicker of resolve ignited within me. I realized that every bruise, every whispered doubt, had prepared me for this moment of quiet awakening. No longer would I allow myself to be defined solely by my pain or my lowly status. The kindness of Ingrid and Lena, the gentle support of those who cared for me, had planted a seed of courage, a promise that I could, in time, transform the burden of my past into the strength needed for a new beginning. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. To step out of the shadows meant facing a world that had always judged me harshly, where the glaring eyes of tradition and expectation would scrutinize every move I made. But the thought of remaining invisible, forever a silent servant, to a destiny that was not my own, was a fate far worse than any trial I might face in the light. In that quiet, reflective moment, as I finished my simple breakfast and gathered the courage to face the day, I vowed to myself that change was not only possible, it was necessary. I would no longer allow the heavy burden of rejection and neglect to dictate the course of my life. Instead, I would use every ounce of pain, every scar etched into my skin, as a stepping stone toward forging a new identity, a brighter, bolder version of myself that would no longer hide in the shadows. As I rose to prepare for the day ahead, the soft murmurs of encouragement from Ingrid and Lena echoed in my mind. Their support was a lifeline, a reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness could spark monumental change. And so, with a heart both heavy and hopeful, I stepped into the world beyond my modest room, determined to prove that I was more than the sum of my past sorrows. Training for change, embracing the challenge. With the dawn of a new day, I made a decision that would change the course of my existence. No longer willing to be defined by the weight of weakness and rejection, I resolved to fight back, both against the physical limitations that had long bound me and the emotional chains that had kept me in the shadows. This was my call to arms, a moment of raw determination to transform pain into power. The training grounds, usually a domain reserved for the seasoned warriors, became my sanctuary. As I stepped onto the worn earth, the chill of the early morning was replaced by a palpable sense of purpose. I could feel the soft rustle of leaves and the steady beat of my heart echoing with the promise of change. Here, in the open space where strength was forged, I was determined to sculpt not just my body, but the very core of my spirit. My first steps into sparring were marked by hesitation and trepidation. The veterans moved with fluid precision and raw power that seemed to defy the limits of human potential. I, on the other hand, felt clumsy, as if each movement was a struggle against inertia. Every punch I threw and every block I attempted was a reminder of years spent in quiet servitude. a life of menial tasks that had left me unprepared for the fierce demands of combat. During those early sessions, sweat and tears blended on my skin. I remember vividly the sting of missed strikes and the echo of my own labored breaths. The impact of my fists, though weak, reverberated in my ears as a constant reminder that growth comes through struggle. Each failed attempt fueled an inner fire, a determination that whispered, "You can be stronger than this." I pushed through the pain, using every bruise and every ache as a stepping stone toward self-empowerment. Under the stern but encouraging guidance of Ingrid, whose eyes shone with both wisdom and a hint of kindness, I began to learn the fundamentals of fighting. She taught me to move with purpose, to let my body speak a language of strength even when my words failed me. "Focus your energy, Arya," she would say, her voice firm yet nurturing. "Every strike is a statement. Let it say that you are here, that you refuse to be forgotten." Her words resonated deeply within me, and slowly I started to see the possibility of transformation. Each training session was a battle against not just physical weakness, but against the ghosts of my past. The memory of every taunt, every scornful glance pushed me harder. I began to notice small victories. My footwork became a bit more graceful, my punches a little more forceful. I could feel the gradual shift in my body. Muscles that had long lain dormant awakened with every determined movement, and my reflexes, once sluggish from neglect, sharpened with each passing day. The training was not just physical, it was profoundly emotional. Every drop of sweat carried with it the burden of years spent in invisibility, and every breath I took was a quiet defiance against the doubts that had haunted me. I learned to channel the raw energy of my inner turmoil into each strike, turning the pain of rejection into a driving force. There were moments of utter frustration, times when my body screamed in protest and my mind pleaded for respite. But in those moments, I began to relish the discipline of sparring, the cadence of punches and parries becoming a form of meditation, the clashing of bodies, the echo of each impact against the training pads, and the rhythmic pounding of my heart all blended into a symphony of transformation. In the midst of this controlled chaos, I found clarity, a vision of the person I could become if I continued to push past my limitations. The arena of training became a microcosm of my internal struggle and eventual triumph. Every session was a silent conversation with my deepest self, a challenge to the notion that I was destined to remain weak and overlooked. I imagined a future where I stood tall, not merely as a servant of fate, but as a beacon of strength who had risen from the ashes of neglect. The spark of self-empowerment began to glow brighter with each passing day, illuminating a path that promised not only physical prowess, but a reclamation of my very identity. As I wrapped up one particularly grueling session, my body exhausted and my mind ablaze with the thrill of progress, I paused to reflect. The bruises on my arms were badges of honor, each one telling a story of pain, persistence, and eventual growth. In that moment of stillness, I realized that every struggle, every setback, was an essential part of my metamorphosis. I was not defined by my past failures, but by the strength I forged in their wake. A deep, unwavering resolve settled within me, a vow that I would continue to train, to fight against the inertia of my old self. I promised that I would not allow the darkness of rejection to eclipse the light of my potential. With each breath, I committed to rising above the remnants of my former insignificance, to step out of the shadows and into a future where I could stand as a testament to resilience and determination. And so, with the echo of Ingrid's encouraging words and the unwavering support of Lena reverberating in my heart, I embraced the challenge of training for change. I understood that the journey ahead would be long and fraught with hardships, but I also knew that every small victory was a step towards a destiny redefined, a destiny where I, the once forgotten Omega. The tournament, a test of skill and spirit. The day of the low-level sparring tournament arrived like a storm on the horizon, a culmination of grueling training sessions and whispered doubts that now charged the very air. The training grounds, usually a quiet arena of personal improvement, had been transformed into a makeshift battleground, with chalk lines marking the ring, and a modest crowd of pack members gathered to witness the contest. I could feel the collective gaze of the pack on me, their anticipation and skepticism mingling in a palpable tension that made my heart pound in my chest. As I warmed up, every movement felt like a desperate attempt to silence the voices that had long declared me weak. My limbs, still marked by bruises from previous bouts, trembled slightly with nerves and determination. I caught sight of Tanya, my opponent, a seasoned beta fighter, known for her relentless training and ferocity. Her presence was formidable. Her eyes held the cold precision of one who had honed her skills over years, and her confident stance exuded a challenge that I both feared and craved to overcome. Before the match began, the arena buzzed with an undercurrent of hushed excitement. The murmurs of my packmates, some rooting for me, others too wary to show support, echoed in my ears. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I remembered every lesson from Ingrid, every word of encouragement from Lena, and every solitary moment of determination spent in the training grounds. I had come too far to be cowed by fear, now. The referee, a senior warrior with an unyielding gaze, stepped forward to announce the rules. "This is a test of skill and spirit," he declared, his voice resonant and unwavering. "Fight with honor and give no quarter until one yields." His words echoed in the quiet space, heightening the stakes of this contest. I stepped into the ring, my pulse racing like a drumbeat, every muscle in my body tensed in anticipation, ready to react, to prove that even an Omega, though underestimated, could possess a fire that defied the pack's expectations. The match began with a sudden burst of motion. Tanya lunged forward, with a series of swift, precise strikes aimed at my midsection. I barely managed to block the initial flurry, the impact of each blow sending shockwaves through my arms. For a split second, the world narrowed down to the sound of my rapid breathing and the sharp, stinging contact of fists meeting flesh. Fear gripped me. Fear of failing in front of everyone. Fear of reinforcing the long-held notion that I was destined to remain forever weak. Yet, in that moment, determination surged within me like a rising tide. I adjusted my stance, remembering Ingrid's instruction. "Stay light on your feet. Let your guard be your shield." I pivoted and dodged, managing to parry a punch and counter with a jab aimed at Tanya's shoulder. The movement felt powerful, an assertion of my newfound resolve. But I knew I was still raw, untested against a fighter of her caliber. The ebb and flow of the fight was a blur of strikes, blocks, and near misses. With every successful parry, a spark of confidence flickered inside me. The crowd's murmurs shifted from skeptical to awed as the battle unfolded with a dramatic intensity. Tanya's eyes flashed with both challenge and respect as she pushed me to my limits, her own movements a testament to years of discipline and training. I could sense her strategy, each step, each feint calculated to break my rhythm, and I fought desperately to counter it, my body responding on instinct. The ring became a canvas for our raw struggle, painted in the hues of sweat, determination, and the sharp tang of adrenaline. Minutes felt like hours as the contest reached a fevered pitch. My arms ached with each repeated impact, and my vision blurred with the intensity of the duel. I could feel every bruise, every fiber of my being, crying out, yet I refused to yield. Every punch that landed on me was a harsh reminder of my vulnerability, but also a challenge to rise above it. In the midst of this visceral dance of combat, my inner voice screamed, urging me to prove that I was more than the labels cast upon me by the pack. Then, In a moment that seemed to stretch into infinity, Tanya feinted a low attack and swiftly swept my legs from under me. The world tilted as I lost my footing, and I felt the cold shock of the ground rush up to meet me. In that heartbeat of vulnerability, I was overwhelmed by the relentless force of her strike. I tried to rise, but the momentum of her move left me sprawled on the rough earth, pain radiating sharply through my body. For several agonizing seconds, time slowed to a crawl. I lay there, gasping for breath, a heavy silence falling over the ring. The murmurs of the crowd faded into the background as uncertainty took hold. My vision swam with flashes of determination, hope, and the haunting possibility of defeat. In that suspended moment, I felt both the crushing weight of my limitations and a desperate urge to prove that I could overcome them. And then, as the referee moved in to signal the end of the match, the world around me erupted into a chaotic blur of shouts, murmurs, and the echo of my own labored breaths. The outcome of the bout hung in the balance, a cliffhanger that left my fate uncertain and the implications of my defeat looming large. Would this match mark the breaking point of my resolve, or would it serve as the catalyst for a transformation that would redefine who I was? As I struggled to rise, my heart pounding in the silence of the moment, the aftermath of battle, protection, pride, and lingering doubts. As the echoes of the tournament slowly faded away, the charged energy in the training grounds gave way to a heavy, reflective silence. The tumult of battle had subsided, leaving behind scattered whispers and the unmistakable scent of sweat and determination lingering in the air. I lay on the edge of the ring, my body trembling with a cocktail of pain and pride. A raw, visceral reminder of every strike exchanged and every moment when hope and despair had collided. The taste of defeat was bitter on my tongue, yet, intertwined with that, a fragile ember of pride smoldered within me, a silent declaration that I had fought with every ounce of my being. Amidst the disarray, Lucian's protective intervention during the match still reverberated in my ears like a battle hymn. His sudden, decisive actions had not only halted the tide of hostility, but had also cast a protective shield around me, a stark reminder of the strength he wielded and the responsibility he bore as our alpha. I watched him now, his broad figure, moving purposefully through the gathering crowd of pack members who buzzed with murmurs and lingering questions. His eyes, deep and unwavering, occasionally met mine with a mix of quiet reassurance and a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher, an emotion that was both protective and distant. The public confrontation had left its mark on all who witnessed. The air was thick with unspoken judgments and wary glances as the pack slowly began to disperse. Some wolves wore expressions of awe, others of apprehension, and a few, the most skeptical, cast dismissive snorts in the fading light. I could sense that my performance in the ring had become a topic of hushed debate, a testament to the harsh realities of our world, where every action was magnified and every misstep was mercilessly scrutinized. In the immediate aftermath, I struggled to collect my scattered thoughts and aching limbs. My heart pounded with a relentless rhythm, a mixture of adrenaline and the deep, pervasive uncertainty of what the outcome truly meant for me. I rose unsteadily, each step a reminder of the physical cost of the confrontation. Bruises and scrapes adorned my arms and legs like battle scars, visible evidence of the struggle that had just unfolded. Yet, beneath the pain, there was also an undeniable sense of accomplishment. I had stepped into the arena, defied the long-held expectations of my station, and, for a brief moment, fought with the ferocity of someone who refused to be defined by weakness. As I made my way off the field, the murmurs of the onlookers followed me, a symphony of praise, concern, and lingering doubt. In the crowd, I caught sight of several pack members whose expressions softened when they looked my way. There was a quiet respect in their eyes, an acknowledgement that even the lowest of us could display courage in the face of overwhelming odds. But the warmth of their acceptance was tainted by the cold reality of judgment from others, judgment that whispered of inadequacy and the perpetual struggle of being an omega in a world ruled by power. Lucian's gaze found me in that moment, and it was as if time stood still. For a fleeting second, his eyes conveyed an unspoken mixture of pride and sorrow, a silent apology for the distance that still lay between us. I felt a surge of conflicting emotions, pride in having endured the trial, yet self-doubt gnawed at my confidence. Could I ever live up to the expectations that now rested heavily upon the protective mantle that Lucian had cast over me in the ring now seemed to weigh on him as well. His face, usually so resolute and unyielding, bore the marks of internal conflict. I sensed that the cost of the confrontation was not measured solely in bruises or in the raw physical strain of battle. It was etched deeply into his soul, a toll that could forever alter the delicate balance of our connection. His unwavering duty as alpha, the relentless pressure of the pack's expectations, and his own uncertain heart converged in a silent, unspoken struggle that left me yearning for a deeper clarity. As I retreated to the quieter edges of the arena, I found solace in a secluded corner where the remnants of the tournament's chaos were fading into the twilight. The low hum of voices and the rustle of departing footsteps formed a melancholic backdrop to my inner monologue. I questioned whether the bond that had been forged amid the violent clash of power and spirit was a true promise of a future together, or merely a fleeting alignment of fate, a transient moment that could shatter under the relentless scrutiny of the pack. In that somber space, the cost of the battle became unmistakably clear. I was marked by conflict, my heart bearing the scars of both physical combat and emotional betrayal. And yet, amid the bitterness of defeat and the chill of rejection, there remained a glimmer of hope, a spark that refused to be extinguished, a promise that somewhere beneath the layers of pain and expectation lay the possibility of transformation. I lingered in the fading light. The echoes of the day's events mingled with the quiet pulse of my resolve. I understood that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges, every step a delicate negotiation between protection and vulnerability, between the relentless weight of the alpha's duty and the yearning of a heart that longed to be seen and cherished. My thoughts swirled with images of Lucian's protective embrace, the silent conversations in our lingering glances, and the unspoken promise that despite everything, our fates were inextricably intertwined. In that twilight moment, I felt a profound uncertainty about what lay ahead, a future where the balance between pride and doubt, between duty and desire, would be constantly tested. Yet, even as the heavy burden of expectations pressed upon me, a quiet strength began to blossom from within. The experience in the ring, with all its triumph and torment, had carved a new space in my heart, a space where hope could take root, even in the harshest conditions. And so, as the last vestiges of the tournament dissolved into the encroaching night, I stood with a mingled sense of relief and confusion. My heart, still echoing with the clamor of battle and the weight of a promise unfulfilled, whispered one lingering, unanswerable question. What price must I pay to truly belong? Whispers in the shadows, rumors, rebellion, and internal strife. In the days that followed the tournament, a new undercurrent began to ripple through the pack, a murmur that grew into a dissonant chorus of gossip and suspicion. The once stable order of our pack was now riddled with whispers, as murmurs of my connection with Lucian spread like wildfire. Behind every hushed conversation, there lay an insidious tension that threatened to unravel the carefully maintained balance of power. Everywhere I went, eyes seemed to linger a little too long, and every conversation carried a subtle note of derision or envy. The pack's betas, in particular, played their quiet games of power. They exchanged knowing glances and cryptic comments in the corners of the training grounds and along the long, echoing corridors. Their words, though wrapped in casual banter, cut sharply, suggesting that I was more than just an unfortunate omega. I was a catalyst for rebellion, a living symbol of a bond that defied tradition. I could sense that these murmurs were not mere idle gossip. They were strategic, designed to test alliances and sow seeds of dissent among those loyal to Lucian. The tension was palpable, each whispered word a spark that could ignite a broader uprising. At times, I felt as though I were standing at the very center of a brewing storm, a storm fueled by envy, resentment, and the fear of change. Inside, I was tormented by the weight of this escalating strife. Each day, I struggled with conflicting emotions, a fierce loyalty to the alpha who had, despite his distance, shown moments of tenderness and protection, and a desperate need to be recognized for who I was, a person of strength and resolve, not merely the forgotten Omega. The whispers were a constant reminder that I was caught in a perilous crossfire. On one side stood the unyielding traditions of the pack, and on the other, a flicker of hope that defied those very traditions. At times, the emotional toll was overwhelming. I would wander the quiet corridors after a long day, my mind reeling from the cacophony of judgments and power plays that surrounded me. I could hear the echo of sharp, dismissive remarks. "She's just a pawn," or "an Omega like her can never change." These words seeped into me, gnawing at my self-worth, and making me question whether I was truly capable of rising above my station. Yet, even as the bitter taste of these doubts grew stronger, a stubborn spark of defiance smoldered within me. I resolved that I would not let these poisonous voices dictate my destiny. In hushed gatherings and clandestine meetings, a new faction seemed to be emerging among the lower ranks, a quiet rebellion fueled by those who had grown tired of the pack's rigid hierarchy. I overheard snippets of conversation in the dim light of twilight. Phrases like, "Change is coming," and "we deserve more," echoing among the ranks. The power plays of the betas were becoming bolder, their subtle manipulations now edging towards open defiance. Their actions, masked by politeness and Yet, as alliances shifted and loyalties were questioned, I found myself increasingly isolated, not only from the upper echelons of the pack, but even from those who had once offered me solace. The emotional isolation was as sharp as the physical, isolation I had known for so long. Every whispered rumor, every sidelong glance, added another layer to the burden I carried. I was no longer just an Omega trying to survive. I had become the focal point of a brewing conflict, a symbol that both inspired and terrified. The mounting pressure left me constantly on edge, acutely aware of the precariousness of my position. I sensed that external threats were beginning to converge with the internal strife. Rival packs, always lurking at the margins, seemed poised to exploit any sign of weakness within our ranks. Their eyes, filled with opportunistic intent, were fixed on the cracks in our unity. Meanwhile, the seeds of internal betrayal, whispered promises of rebellion, and the subtle coercion of influential betas began to erode the trust that had once held us together. Each day, as I faced the pack's relentless scrutiny and the unyielding power plays of those who sought to use my existence as a tool, I wrestled with a single, haunting question. Could I prove myself beyond the shadow of my past? The duality of my situation was a constant torment, a battle between the desperate need for recognition and the bitter reality of rejection. In the solitude of the night, I would stare out into the inky blackness beyond our territory, feeling the chill of the wind and the weight of countless unseen eyes. I imagined rival packs watching, waiting for the moment our internal fractures would expose us to external attack. The sense of impending doom mingled with the raw intensity of my inner resolve, creating a volatile mix that both frightened and propelled me. As the whispers in the shadows grew louder, I knew that the stakes had never been higher. The pack was at a tipping point, and the fragile bonds that held us together were fraying under the strain of ambition, envy, and a desperate yearning for change. And amid it all, I stood, a symbol of both potential and vulnerability, uncertain if I would ever escape the chains of invisibility or be consumed by the rising tide of rebellion. In that moment of profound internal strife and looming external threat, the future seemed shrouded in uncertainty. Every whispered rumor and every subtle power play raised the stakes even higher, leaving me to wonder if the cost of our internal division would be the downfall of everything I had ever hoped for. The question hung in the air, heavy and unyielding, as I realized that the path ahead was fraught with both peril and possibility, a precarious The gathering, the crucible of destiny. The air was thick with anticipation, a palpable tension that seemed to electrify every corner of the pack house as preparations for the annual gathering began in earnest. This was not just another event. It was the crucible in which the fate of our pack, and perhaps even my own future, would be decided. The gathering, a time-honored tradition steeped in ritual and high stakes, was a moment when alliances were forged, reputations were tested, and the delicate balance of power was laid bare for all to see. In the days leading up to the event, the entire pack buzzed with nervous energy. The usually subdued corridors transformed into hives of activity, with every member scurrying about to ready the grounds, arrange the sumptuous feast, and ensure that every detail met the strict standards expected by visiting allies. Amid this orchestrated chaos, I found myself tasked with a role I had never imagined, coordinating the logistics for the gathering. Though I was reluctant at first, burdened by the weight of my past insignificance, there now burned a determined resolve. Within me, I had been thrust into the spotlight as the unlikely organizer, and I knew that the success of this event could be my chance to redefine my place within the pack. Every morning, as the first light broke over the horizon, I surveyed the preparations with a mix of awe and trepidation. The grand hall, once a neglected space, was being transformed into a breathtaking arena of opulence and order. Long, polished tables were arranged meticulously, each set with gleaming silverware and delicate dishes that promised a feast to rival those of ancient legends. Tapestries and banners bearing the pack's emblem were hung with precision, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the drab tones of my former world. Yet, even as I marveled at the spectacle, a heavy burden pressed upon my heart. I was aware that every detail, every carefully orchestrated nuance, was not only a reflection of our pack's aspirations, but also a testament to the growing scrutiny that accompanied change. The stakes were higher than ever. Rumors and whispers had begun to circulate, suggesting that the success of this gathering would either fortify our pack's stability or expose the fractures that had long been hidden beneath the surface. Rival packs watched with keen interest, waiting for any sign of weakness. Internally, the subtle power plays among the betas, and the murmurs of rebellion hung in the air like a storm cloud, threatening to burst forth at any moment. Amid this charged atmosphere, I was not merely coordinating an event, I was, in many ways, orchestrating the future of our community. The weight of expectation was immense, and every misstep could unravel not only my own fragile progress, but also the hard-won unity of our pack. As the hours turned into days, I worked tirelessly alongside a small circle of allies who had shown me unexpected kindness. Ingrid, with her sharp eyes and unwavering discipline, and Lena, whose gentle support and quiet wisdom had become a beacon in my dark days, stood by my side. Together, we navigated the intricate logistics, scheduling rehearsals, managing supplies, and even mediating disputes among those who doubted my ability to lead. Their support was both a lifeline and a reminder that change, though daunting, was also inevitable. Every whispered word of encouragement, every nod of approval, spurred me onward, transforming my reluctance. The night before the gathering, as the final touches were being made and the excitement mingled with anxious whispers, I found myself alone in the grand hall. The space was bathed in a soft, ethereal light, the reflections of candles dancing across polished surfaces. In that quiet moment, the enormity of what was to come weighed heavily on my soul. I could almost feel the eyes of the entire pack, and perhaps even those of our rivals, upon me. The outcome of this event would not only determine our standing in the region, but also shape the future of my own identity. Would I finally be seen as a leader, capable of rising above the limitations imposed by my past? Or would I remain trapped in the shadows of doubt and rejection? Every heartbeat throbbed with a mixture of hope and fear, and the silence was punctuated by the distant hum of preparations outside. The potential for rebellion, for internal betrayal, loomed ominously like a dark specter, ready to exploit any sign of weakness. Yet, amid these swirling uncertainties, a fierce, burning desire for transformation ignited within me. I vowed, in that solitary moment, that I would no longer allow the remnants of my old life to dictate my future. The gathering was my crucible, a trial by fire through which I would either emerge reborn or be consumed by the flames. As I stepped away from the quiet solitude of the hall, I could feel the rush of destiny pulling me forward. The coming day promised to be a turning point, not just for our pack, but for me as well. The path ahead was fraught with peril, with the weight of external threats and the specter of internal dissent threatening to tip the balance at any moment. Yet, in that moment of hushed anticipation, I allowed myself to embrace the challenge. With Ingrid's steady guidance and Lena's unwavering support echoing in my mind, I resolved to step out of invisibility and claim my rightful place, not just as an organizer, but as a force capable of shaping the destiny of our pack. In the soft glow of dawn, as the final preparations neared completion and the reality of the gathering loomed ever closer, I felt a stirring of something profound, a call to rise above the past, to transform every doubt and every scar into a beacon of strength and purpose. The gathering was more than an event. It was the crucible of destiny, and I was determined to prove that confrontation and commitment. A public declaration. The day of the gathering had finally arrived, and the grand hall was alive with a charged energy that crackled in every whispered word and determined glance. As pack members from near and far assembled in the vast decorated hall, the atmosphere was heavy with both anticipation and tension. The elaborate arrangements of polished tables, flickering candles, and banners bearing the pack's emblem only deepened the sense that this was no ordinary celebration. It was a crucible in which every alliance, every hidden grievance, would be put to the test. As the ceremony commenced, murmurs spread like wildfire among the assembled wolves. Whispers of dissent and cautious optimism clashed in a delicate dance. Amid this charged environment, external critics wasted no time in voicing their disapproval. A group of high-ranking betas, emboldened by years of tradition, openly questioned the legitimacy of our bond. Their voices, sharp and accusatory, sliced through the warm, festive air. How can an alpha lead when his mate is a forgotten omega? One sneered, while another demanded, "Is this not a sign of weakness that will fracture our unity?" Their words hung heavily in the room, casting long shadows over what should have been a night of celebration. Standing at the center of this swirling storm, I felt the weight of every judgment and every skeptical gaze. My heart pounded fiercely as I took in the raw criticism, each remark an echo of past rejection, a reminder of all the years I had been cast aside. The barrage of challenges and the stinging scrutiny seemed designed to force me into the background, to confine me once more to a role of insignificance. Yet, even as doubts threatened to overwhelm me, a deep, unwavering resolve began to kindle within. I was no longer willing to hide in the shadows of my former self. Then, amid the heated debates and impassioned speeches, Lucian emerged from the circle of his closest advisors. His presence was a stark, commanding force, a living embodiment of the pack's ancient strength. As he ascended the raised platform, the hall fell into a heavy, expectant silence. Every eye was fixed on him, and even the most critical voices seemed to hesitate in anticipation of what he would say next. Lucian's gaze swept over the crowd, his cobalt eyes igniting with a fiery intensity that belied the calm exterior he maintained. He began with a low, resonant tone that carried the weight of centuries of tradition, yet it was imbued with a personal, almost tender resolve. "My fellow wolves," he declared, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a clarion call. "Today we stand at a crossroads, not merely of leadership, but of destiny. I have heard the voices of dissent, the doubts cast upon my choices, and the whispers that seek to undermine our unity. But I say to you, our strength lies not in the rigid confines of tradition, but in the courage to evolve." The hall trembled with the impact of his words. His declaration was more than a rebuttal. It was a profound statement of commitment, a pledge that our pack would rise above petty judgments and outdated conventions. As he continued, Lucian's speech became a powerful tapestry woven with passion and conviction. "I chose my mate not out of obligation, but out of a belief that every soul has a unique worth. Arya, my mate, embodies the resilience, the fierce determination, and the untapped potential that this pack so desperately needs. It is not weakness to see beauty in the..." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience, though not all faces were softened. Some still wore expressions of skepticism, their eyes narrowed with unresolved hostility. Yet, the clarity in Lucian's voice and the resolute set of his jaw left little room for further argument. His words were a bold repudiation of the old order, a public declaration that challenged every critic in the hall to reconsider what true strength meant. I felt my emotions surge, pride and doubt, hope and uncertainty, all entwined in a powerful, almost overwhelming cocktail. Part of me swelled with pride at being recognized by him, at having his protection and his acknowledgement. Yet, the public nature of his speech also exposed the raw vulnerability of our connection, a reminder that our path was fraught with challenges. Every word he spoke seemed to peel back another layer of the guarded distance he had maintained, inviting both adoration and further scrutiny. Lucian's speech reached its zenith when he declared, with unwavering authority, "Let it be known that, from this day forward, we embrace not just the legacy of our ancestors, but the promise of a future defined by our own resolve. I stand before you as a leader, not merely by birthright, but by the conviction that even those once deemed insignificant can rise to shape destiny. Let my bond with Arya be a testament to our willingness to defy the old ways, to seek strength in unity, and to build a future where every voice is heard." A charged silence fell over the hall as his words hung in the air, a moment thick with emotion and the heavy implications of his declaration. In that dramatic pause, I felt both the weight of the pack's expectations and the profound shift in our collective future. The room was filled with the electric hum of anticipation, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the next chapter of our shared destiny to unfold. That night, as the echoes of Lucian's public declaration reverberated through the gathering, I was left with a myriad of emotions, profound relief intermingled with a lingering, gnawing uncertainty about our future. The turning point had been set, not just for me, but for the entire. A new bond forged, the Alpha's acknowledgement and the promise of tomorrow. In the heart of the gathering, as the last embers of twilight surrendered to a deep, velvety night, the grand hall transformed into a stage set for destiny. Every eye was fixed on the raised platform where Alpha Lucian stood, his presence casting a long, commanding shadow across the room. The air pulsed with expectancy, every whispered rumor, every lingering doubt, converging into a single, powerful moment of truth. Lucian's gaze, once distant and conflicted, now shone with unyielding resolve as he addressed the assembled pack. His voice, low and resonant, carried a mixture of authority and tender vulnerability that sent shivers through my very core. "Today," he began, each word deliberate and weighted with history, I choose to honor the bond that has redefined my path and, by extension, the future of our pack. His eyes swept over the crowd before landing on mine, a silent communication that spoke of shared pain, triumph, and the promise of a future built on trust and transformation. As he continued, the tension in the hall shifted palpably. Lucian stepped down from the platform and approached me with measured steps. The hall fell into a reverent hush as he extended his hand, an invitation that carried both the strength of an alpha and the gentleness of a long-suppressed heart. Every heartbeat resonated in that touch, a subtle marking of destiny that transcended the boundaries of our past roles. In a display that was both symbolic and deeply sensual, Lucian pressed his hand against my chest, over the place where our fates had begun to intertwine. A soft, almost imperceptible warmth emanated from his skin, a tangible promise that our connection was no longer a secret kept in the shadows, but a beacon for our future. His voice dropped to a whisper that only I could hear. "Arya, with this touch, I mark you as my mate. Let it be known that our bond is not a mere happenstance of fate, but a choice to rise, to endure, and to redefine strength and unity within this pack." The words stirred a tumult of emotions within me, pride mingled with uncertainty, relief intermingled with the raw echo of past rejection. I felt my pulse quicken as his fingers traced a delicate line along my skin, leaving behind a subtle, almost luminous glow, a mark that was as much a physical imprint as it was a symbolic seal of our union. The light from the candles caught in that ephemeral glow, creating a halo of hope around us that illuminated the faces of the onlookers. The pack erupted into a cascade of mixed reactions. Some of the older wolves, whose eyes had long harbored skepticism, now softened with cautious admiration. Others, driven by tradition and fear of change, exchanged wary glances, their expressions shadowed with uncertainty. Even among the betas, whose power plays had sown discord in recent days, there was a noticeable shift, a grudging respect emerging from the depths of long-standing biases. The murmurs in the hall slowly transformed from sharp, condemning whispers to a respectful silence that acknowledged the magnitude of this declaration. In that charged moment, standing before my alpha, I felt a surge of empowerment that I had never known before. Lucian's acknowledgement was not merely a public statement. It was a personal, transformative act that etched itself into the very fabric of my soul. His eyes, fierce and tender in equal measure, locked with mine as if to say, "We face this future together." There, in that liminal space between ancient tradition and the promise of a new era, the bonds that once confined me began to crumble. Yet, even as the hall resounded with subdued cheers and quiet applause, a lingering suspense shrouded the air, a sense that our journey was only just beginning. The declaration had forged a new bond, powerful and irrevocable, yet the road ahead was fraught with the challenges of external threats and internal betrayals. The promise of tomorrow carried with it the weight of responsibility. To unite the pack, to overcome the entrenched fears of our adversaries, and to nurture the transformative power of love that now pulsed between us. As the gathering drew to a close and the crowd slowly dispersed into the cool embrace of the night, Lucian and I remained, standing together beneath the soft glow of a solitary lantern. In that quiet, lingering moment, the future shimmered with both hope and uncertainty. The mark of our union, still radiant upon my skin, served as a constant reminder that our fates were now intertwined, a beacon of strength and unity amid the encroaching darkness. I could feel the gentle pull of destiny, urging me forward into a tomorrow that promised renewal and challenge in equal measure. Our bond, born of pain and nurtured through defiance, was now a transformative force, a promise that even in the face of relentless tradition and formidable opposition, love and courage could redefine the very essence of our existence. And so, as the night deepened around us, a silent vow echoed within my heart. a promise to embrace the future, to stand alongside Lucian as we navigated the turbulent path ahead, and to honor the new bond that had been forged in the crucible of our shared destiny. The journey was only beginning, and with every breath, the hope for a brighter, united tomorrow grew stronger, even as the shadows whispered of trials yet to come.